So we're going to make a little pit stop here in our ongoing Business Insurance Essentials series, and we'll talk about the S-Corp. So instead of episode 3, we'll call this episode 2.5 because the S-Corp is actually a subchapter class of a incorporated business, right? So S-Corp is what's called a tax classification, most commonly found under the business entity of a limited liability company. So we've got the business structure, the entity, LLC, and the tax classification, the S-Corp designation. So in the last episode, we talked a lot about how a LLC would succeed in its business plan, how it was set up, the structure, and some of the tax and liability implications of having an LLC. Because this series is also a lot about just learning and understanding the various business structures available to anybody out there looking to start a business, I'm going to go in a little deeper on that. When you form an LLC, you also choose what's called a tax classification. As an LLC, you can choose to be classified for tax purposes as a sole proprietorship, an S-Corp, or a corporation. And I did them in that order for a reason. Essentially a sliding scale of how much pass-through or entity tax you're going to receive. What I mean by that is if you go back to episode 1 when we talked about sole proprietorships, you know that all the income and all the expenses experienced as operating as a business is going to pass through to you as the owner and operator. So everything is one and the same. In LLC, we also talked about how an LLC is also treated as one and the same, where the portion of the business or the entire business, if it's just one order, is again taxed both as the business and as the individual. It passes through all profits and expenses are both. Therefore, effectively, you are paying taxes on business revenues as an individual. But in an LLC, because it's a form of incorporation, you can actually also choose to be fully treated as an incorporated business. That means the IRS will now treat both you and your business as two separate entities completely for purposes of taxation. So you will receive individual taxes and your business will receive corporate taxes. Now here's where the S-Corp comes in, right? Now this is something that I'm sure you've all heard about. It's kind of a popular business structure, but it really depends on the times and how favorable the tax climate is for that type of business and that type of ownership setup. But what effectively an S-Corp does is it bridges the gap between being classified, again, we're under the LLC business entity, being classified for tax purposes as an LLC to be treated as either sole proprietorship or a corporation. The S-Corp falls squarely in the middle. You're still receiving that pass-through taxation like you would in a sole proprietorship, while also avoiding being treated as a separate corporate entity on the business side. So effectively, the IRS is allowing you to continue to enjoy that pass-through taxation, continuing to enjoy that limited liability, and very importantly, allowing you to pay yourself as an employee, which is something you cannot do as just a sole proprietor under the LLC business structure. For many business owners, by doing this, they're allowed to skip out on some taxes that would be levied against them as a self-employed business owner. It also gives them access to retirement plans like 401ks. And although they can pay themselves like an employee, like a regular corporation would, although they are not treated as a separate corporation, and so therefore they get to avoid the double taxation that regular corporations have to experience when it comes to paying both the corporate tax rate and then paying the individual taxes on the salary. Now, of course, there are drawbacks to enjoying many of these features. One is there's a cap on the amount of owners that you can actually have. It's capped at 100 shareholders. 2 is they all have to be domestic. They all have to be from the U.S. And 3, it's treated a little bit more as a corporation, so you will have to initiate a board, appoint corporate officers, and in general, it's going to require just more reporting and more formalities. The business succession is still the same as the previous episode of the LLC business structure because we are still under a LLC business structure. I know I've said that quite a bit, but it's very important to understand that S-Corp is not a business entity. It is just a tax classification. So just to recap, the S-Corp tax classification under the LLC will allow you the same pass-through taxation as sole proprietorship. It will allow you limited liability as incorporation. And the coup de grace, it will allow you to pay yourself as an employee without having to pay separate corporate entity taxes, thereby not being doubly taxed on the corporate tax rate and individual tax rate as the owner would be, and skipping out on many of the self-employment taxes that individuals and sole proprietorships would experience. These types of tax classifications will generally only be used for moderate revenue generating companies that are in the beginning loss years. And if the tax structure at the time is favorable, that designating like this will allow them to enjoy more tax deductions while still having that limited liability. Designating as S-Corp is a good option. Hope that helps somebody somewhere. And so if you're noticing the trajectory of things, you'll probably be able to guess that the next episode, episode 3, will be on the full Schedule C corporation.